So really quickly, good afternoon and welcome to our second webinar today, hosted by the National Resource Center for Asian Languages and supported by the partnership with Californians Together through the California Department of Education Educator Workforce Investment Grant. We're just really thrilled that you're able to join us today. Um, Go ahead, Bang Lang, if you can excel to the next one. So welcome
Fernando will
back. You
share.
know, for those of you who are returning, as well as welcome new friends who are joining us for the first time this afternoon. We want to thank you for your time and hope that you will be able to continue to join us for the entire series because they are actually built and designed that way to have some type of coherence and continuity throughout. For today's topic, we will build on the content discussed in the previous webinar and looking deeper into how asset based education can be integrated throughout the curriculum and specifically in your daily instruction. My colleague, Dr. Fernando Rodriguez Vald here, and I will be facilitating today's session. But I would also like to add that joining us today is also a special guest that we have, and that is Nancy Yue, and she is a kindergarten teacher for the Vietnamese Dual Language Immersion Program at Franklin McKinley School District in San Jose, California. And so it is really just a wonderful treat to have her join us today. Throughout the webinar series, we will be inviting teachers and educators to co-present with us as we co-construct and share practices to support all language learners. So we might be reaching out to you for our subsequent webinar series. Fernando, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, it's just I concur with my colleague Natalie and friend that we're so happy that you're back with all of us, and I know that we're super busy, but we are together in this journey that is going to take us for almost 3 years, 2.5 years. So hopefully you are with us along the way, and so excited. And please feel free, feedback, ideas, and when we ask. So let's get ready and let's get deeper on what is asset-based
Mhm.
education. So I know that, as I was saying before, we all have busy days, long days. I'm assuming that maybe some of you, all of us, started 7:30 in the morning, and now here we are, 4:15 in the afternoon, and then ready to learn more. So I would like for all of us to take maybe 45 seconds, 1 minute to read this quote and see how this is going to kind of like a settle, in a kind of like a, I wouldn't say meditation mindfulness, but how to settle into today's training and how we can carry this quote and what the quote says across along the whole workshop. So let's take 45 seconds of silence and read and thinking, reflective piece. Okay. Thank you all. Hopefully now we're more settled, kind of like the rise that we have, because sometimes the adrenaline goes from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, and now we're settled. And think about this quote as we go through today's workshop. So we're going to ask you now, reflecting on this and everything that we discussed in our previous workshop. And if you were not part of that, it's fine too. I think we will carry this. It's more like building on, as Natalie said. We would like for you, if I can go. And think about these two words, assets and needs. And if you don't mind, can you please think about these two and the difference in between these two words? What is an asset and what is a need? can you write in the chat the difference between these two terms? What is, when you think about asset and you think about need, what are some of the main differences between these two things? If you don't mind to write a couple of sentences explaining the difference between these two terms in the chat room, and we will give you like a minute or 2 minutes to write it. So please write this in the chat room, the difference between asset and need. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you all. Thank you all. Oops, sorry. Let's give ourselves 30 more seconds to answer this question. What's the difference between these two? And as we finishing this, the writing, we're going to ask for some volunteers to open the mic and share what they wrote and explain it. If you can provide a little bit more detail, or if you want to, we can call some of you. But we prefer for you to be the ones volunteering and sharing and everything that you wrote.
I can
Okay.
go. I can go if you
Okay.
want me to. I can start it.
Can we have, sorry, can we have this housekeeping rule? Every time that somebody talks, you say your first name and last name, whatever you wrote right there. So can you say who you are? So we can make it more personal, like rather than just hearing a voice. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Monique Ortega. I'm a high school teacher. I teach three sections of ALD courses in high school. So when I think of assets, I think of building on someone's personal strengths, something that you're good with, and we're just going to keep expanding and growing with that. When I think of needs, I think it's like necessities that everybody should have, but maybe they don't, right? So that's where that negative kind of connotation, like if you don't have it, you need it, right? But we should all have our needs met. So yeah, that's kind of what I see assets and needs.
Thank you so much. Agree. I think that's kind of like the tricky part sometimes when we think about needs, that sometimes we come up is like a deficit approach. So, but absolutely, but the needs need to be met. Thank you. Couple more voices from today's audience that you would like to share. Please open your mic and feel free.
I'd like to share.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm Molly Timmers from
He said, looks like that
from
happens
Crusher.
often.
Whoops.
The Verissimo guy. He said, is this a regular thing? Looks like that happens often.
Sorry.
Somebody can everyone else mute their mics because I think yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, I'm Molly Timmers from Crossroads Charter Academy in Armona, California. And I have an asset is what you bring to the learning experience, and a need is what you hope to take away from the learning experience.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks. Part of the outcome and like this piece as well. One more thought that you wrote in the chat, and you don't mind sharing with us and explain what you wrote. One more. One more. One more. Okay, so I'm going to call a couple of you. I don't mind. You don't mind doing this. What about? Let me see if I pronounce, because you pronounce your names correctly. Merni Aste. I think it's Merni Aste. Are you there? Your last name Aste. Merni Aste. Are you there?
I am. And I put a weird phrase that what I meant by it was the assets is what I bring to the situation, and then I need to continue to add on to that. I'm thinking in terms of the students and how I need to frame how I think of them. They bring something to the learning situation, and the needs are just what will make their assets better. So, enough said.
Okay. Thank you so much. Agree. Okay, so the question that we wanted to reflect on this difference is how asset-based we focus on the assets should be the starting point. Obviously, students have different areas of growth, but one thing that we really want to avoid is a deficit approach that we just focusing on the needs rather than what the students bring to the classroom, no? Because sometimes if we just start with the needs, then sometimes we approach it going back to the quote, and what they don't have. And all the students, all language learners, they bring a lot to the classroom, and how we educators are going to learn from there, and we will talk about the continuum a little bit more later on, and how we're going to adapt and modify our practices. So keep this thinking that you have in the chat as we move along. So remember that when we met last time, we asked you to do some activities throughout the workshop. And we asked you as a team, in different teams, to visualize what the word asset means to you all. And you came up with beautiful drawings and beautiful pictures that you identify as a team. And then later in the workshop, we asked you to see if the picture that you as a team created to visualize asset was aligned with the language written in the principles, no? The ELA-ELD principles. So what you see in this slide in the left side, so we read through all your data, which is so important for us for feedback as we develop these workshops. Many of you said the assets are gifts. And we agree with that. These are the presents that the students bring to the classroom. These are all the richness that they bring to the classroom. And we have to celebrate those, but much more we have to include them, not just celebrate what the students bring to the classroom. Now how we're going to include this. Many of you said the strengths, and I think it's still not for a lot of us, because all of us here, we are in the same boat, and we think language learners bring a lot of strengths, but it's still a lot of mindset out there, not for us, for others, that they see language learners don't have what they need to have in order to be successful. So how we're going to tweak this a little bit. Then many of you said the asset base, and we agree, and that's going to be pretty much in principles 3 and 4. One classroom can work really well, but in order to have a strong asset base, needs to be systemic, needs to be across grade levels, within the whole school site, and only we can accomplish that if we collaborate together. So for example, and Natalie and I were reflecting, and also with Nancy, I am an amazing teacher in the classroom, and my classroom is doing super asset-based education, but everyone else in the school is not, then it's going to be really hard, because we want to have a systemic change based on asset-based education, which means that we have to be connected. We have to be connected and prepare together, plan together, actively listen, and assess together. And the question that we ask you all is how, now that once we learn what the assets are the students bring to the classroom, the language learners, how we're going to include those. And that requires horizontal planning, vertical planning, school-wide planning, district-wide planning, county planning, so that we can have all this kind of like a common ground for all of us. One thing that is super important, and many of you highlighted in your visuals, is the relationships. Because when we talk about asset base, is the richness of the community, how we're going to engage the community in a really meaningful way, not just asking them. So creating spaces where we can really learn together, not just within the classroom, within the school site, but also community. The asset-based approach is community at large. And one thing that we like to see, and some of you said this, assets as a growth, they flow. We start with the assets, they're being enhanced throughout the process, and finally, at the end of the outcome, they're still there, and because we utilize and include the assets, then the outcome is the one that we desire, and hopefully we met what we call needs, according to the evaluation that we created. Then the second part of the homework I use in the right side of the slide is, we ask you to reflect, as I said, what is the link between your visual and the language, the principles they have. Some of you said that your image did not quite capture the socio-emotional piece, and we completely agree. When we think about asset-based, it's not just about teaching and learning. There are many other components that have to be included within the instruction. The socio-emotional piece is super important. I would say, especially now in this online or hybrid, and how we're going to really lower the stress, how we're going to show the students they bring a lot of assets during the online instruction, and how we take care of ourselves in terms of health and socio-emotional health. Then another thing that you said that maybe your image did not capture quite what is written at the principles is that how we don't use the word classroom management when we talk about asset base. We are using the word cultural climate, because classroom management sounds more like the technical work. How we're going to create a space with all the assets that students bring to the classroom to include and to embrace to create a culturally and linguistically learning space. So some of you also said that your image did not capture, once again, the funds of knowledge, because we know the communities have a lot of richness. And we focus so much in teaching, and we forget that educating is a much more holistic activity. They're not just teaching standards and then assessments, which is super important, but how we're going to utilize the funds of knowledge and the funds of language. And the teachers, some of you said that, once again, they need to understand what culturally and linguistically responsive and sustainable pedagogy means. So now, as I said, in the left side of this slide is what your pictures visualize. In the right side of the slide is maybe what we were missing. And that's important because this is a learning process. And when we start the first workshop and as we go along, we have room to grow as educators, all of us being here, and we're going to learn from each other. And we selected one of the pictures that we have right there. All of them, they're beautiful and visualized, but remember, some of you in the team said this, the escalator and the flowers and how the assets go, and that is kind of always going up, and we're becoming better, and students learning, and how we enrich this in a really holistic way, and how we can really learn from the assets the students bring to the classroom. The next part of the homework that we asked you to do, remember, some of you completed. I know that we're busy. We ask you to think where you in the continuum, or where you place yourself or your practices or the practices that others implement in your school site. And these, once again, are some of the common themes. It's not that we did kind of like a research-based coding on everything they said, but reading through this, some of you said that teachers don't know how to do integrated TLD. And for me, that's a really important thing, because if we're going to be consistent and asset-based, once again, it cannot just happen in one subject area. It cannot just be done by one teacher. And the integrated TLD versus the designated TLD is one piece. Sometimes we put too much pressure on the designated TLD teachers without forgetting that without integrated TLD, it's not going to be language development. So the language development should be across the subject area, across all the subject literacies, and how we're going to bring the assets for every subject area. The assets the students bring for mathematics, for science, for history, for physical education, for music and art. So this, once again, needs to be a collective effort. Integrated TLD. And I would like to stop right here. I think the multiple subject, the K6 teachers, they have a better understanding of this because usually they teach all the subject areas. So they teach integrated TLD and they're in control. kind of like what happens is when the students go to middle school and high school, when they start have different subject areas, the content area teachers sometimes, and hopefully that's not the case, sometimes they don't do integrated TLD. They just teach content. And sometimes by doing that, you forget the students bring a lot of assets, and they do in terms of language, in terms of culture. No, but I need to teach the standards, Fernando, because I'm a math teacher, a science teacher, and I would say 100% correct. But how you're going to utilize the linguistic richness that students bring to the classroom. So think about how the integrated TLD and the designated pieces work together. The other one that you share is the little expectations, no, that we have the teachers to have the knowledge of how to learn and include the student assets. This is more like principles 3 and 4, although we would like to share this with you. A systemic change. This needs to be from, I wouldn't say top bottom, but needs to be kind of like expectation from all the school districts, from the district office, within the school sites, with the principals and administrators, that we are going to use an asset-based methodology in pedagogy, but it needs to be cohesive. Once again, it cannot be just in one classroom, because then the lucky students that have that amazing teacher, wonderful for them, but these students will go to another teacher the next year or to other subject area teachers. So how we're going to do that? I want to learn more from my students. That's definitely, I think it's a work in progress. I'm always learning and reading on how to better get to know my students, how am I going to grasp, how I'm going to really get rid of my biases and stereotypes. We all have all these biases and stereotypes, I do. How I'm going to contextualize here, learning from my students, from my community, that's the P. Can we do more connections? And that's a key part, how we are going to connect the assets with the thing that I have to teach. So I want for you to see those two pieces, no? The asset and the standards. The standards are the benchmark, and they are the same for every single student, which is fine, set up by the state. The assets are going to enrich differently in every school site. And I'm saying this because sometimes we want to bring a program from District A to District B. And they did a really good job with the asset base, but unless you adapt that program to the assets that are unique of your community, it's not going to work. There is not out there a magic program that can work in every school district without any type of adaptation or modification, because every school district have different demographics, different cultural and linguistic regions. So these are the pieces that are going to make the program work. In the next workshops, and starting today we have a great example on how to use the students' assets in my practices. This is the focus, how we're going to really learn together and how to use those assets. And the support. And I think I was in a meeting on Tuesday, and I think sometimes what happens is you get consultants or you get people from outside the school district who comes and say, let's do this, let's do asset base. They do a wonderful workshop and then they leave and then, okay, just do it. I think the important for me as an educator and what I learned is the technical assistant piece. It's not just someone coming and telling you or sharing with you ideas, not what to do ideas, is how we are going to get support throughout the process. And that's so important that we're going to analyze this in principles 3 and 4, because it's just one workshop and nothing happens in between. It is not the technical assistant and the accountability, then change is not going to happen. And then asset base will be an ideal, but it's nothing to be in action. That's something that we can implement and evaluate, and if we have to modify. Before we go to the activities that we have prepared today, just a reminder for what we explained last time. Remember that we have the continuum, and we explained the 6 different levels. And one thing that we would like for you to keep in mind for today's workshop is when we talk, we are placing ourselves in this continuum as educators. Remember, you can place yourself in different levels as a family member, as a community member, in different roles. But for today's workshop and moving forward, when we analyze and place ourselves in this continuum, we would like for you to see yourself as an educator. And things change. We started right here, and then we will end right here, and sometimes we go back and we will move forward. It's fine. All these are to self-evaluate yourselves. They're not there to judge others. It's to learn and grow together in a constructive way. And if I'm in level 3, what else can I do to move to level 4, 5, and 6? And things that we can do in my classroom and with the feedback of others. Now, Natalie, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thank you, Fernando. I appreciate that. So if for the next 10 minutes or so, what we would like to do is to invite you to join in small groups. Banglang, if you can set it up for, 5 or 6 people per group. And then we would like to reflect, to ask you to reflect on your journey as an educator. So think about, from the beginning, where were you in the cultural continuum when you began your career as an educator, right? And, depending on where we are, we may have very different entry points, right? And then reflect on that and think about now, where would you place, right, yourself on the cultural continuum? And then maybe I think one thing to do is it would be helpful to kind of provide some concrete example um, of how you see the growth over the years, and specifically focusing on now where you are right now, how you might have done things differently compared to years ago when you entered the profession on this particular topic in working with different language learners. And then we're going to ask you to come back in about 10 minutes and we'll ask you to share a little bit about some highlights from your discussion. Time to maybe do 2 or 3 group share out. Any highlights from your discussion? Don't be shy. And again, you don't have to provide a summary. Perhaps just identify a component or one thing that you heard from a colleague that perhaps you hadn't thought about, something that was new and different.
Well, I'll share. One of my colleagues was a vice principal. I think a vice principal. Sorry, she's a principal, and she was saying that when she first started some years back, that she was a new teacher and she just came in and she did what she was told, and you know, basically followed the school's guidelines, and she said later on she did more because she felt like she didn't do much when she was a new teacher, but she stepped that up as she went along, working with the students. And there were like there were 5 of us in a group, and two or three sort of agreed. There was another teacher who also had a similar experience and said she was in a predominantly, I want to say, white school, and that the next large demographic were the Spanish speaking students, and that she as well did what she was told. And then there were 2 of us who said that we came in, we were kind of already a little bit more culturally aware, but still faced some struggles as we went along. And anybody from my group, feel free to join in if it's my best recollection. I'm on my phone with a Bluetooth, but that's kind of what we shared and talked about. Maybe 2 felt that we came in. Then we have one brand new teacher who says that it's been difficult on Zoom, but that she's also doing the best that she can to include all of her students, her diverse classroom. So I think that kind of sums it up a little bit about what we talked about in our group.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Crystal, thank you for sharing what we said in our group. And I was part of Crystal's group, but we all did agree that as we continue even today, we are open to and learning. So we all agree that that's the best thing, that we are continuing to learn. We have that open-mindedness, and we know that there, even within for example, even within the Hispanic community, the culture is different. Mexicans might not celebrate what los de Honduras or El Salvador. So we were still on that learning continuum and we're open to learning. So that's what we all said, all 5 of us said in our group as well.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Maria. And I suspect that this is from group 5. Is that right? There was a little shout out
Yeah.
in the
Yes.
chat. Yes. Okay. I think we have time for perhaps one more group. Again, any highlights or anything that you heard that you thought was really interesting, intriguing, that made you think about, something else or something new? Monique, did you want to add?
Oh, sure, I can. I see lots of faces. It's kind of weird. I didn't even see mine, but I saw everybody else's. Sure. So I had Nancy, Fernando, Janice, Lilia, and Ivy. Ivy was multitasking, so we didn't get to hear much from her, but maybe we will next time. I really appreciate the professionalism and the openness that came from the whole group. And what stood out to me was that we all kind of have a lot of experience working with students. That's where we're like the same. And that there was a feel of, we just really wanted, we got training to include, like some of them were social justice kind of trained from school, from their higher education when they came in and wanted to implement all of that. As opposed to, I think I'm a little bit older than some of the people, so I didn't get the social justice training, but I always just personally had this empathy for people and wanted to include people. And I think the idea that we all want to include our students as much as possible kind of stood out to me. And Fernando, I appreciate his way of telling a story. And at the end, he kind of gave a little bit of a history of how he came in just like only Spanish. And he's grown probably immensely. He didn't get to finish, but I really loved our group and I appreciate the assets that we brought to the table in that short period of time.
Thank you, Monique, for sharing that. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into the next segment, if that's okay. Go ahead, Bang Lang. Do you want to advance? Yep, thank you. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll have a chance to examine a concrete practice in the classroom used to support student language development. And this week or this webinar, we're going to focus on Vietnamese, but we would like to focus on other languages, in subsequent. So as we engage in this discourse, I just want to, kind of wanted to remind us some protocol of engagement and ask that all of us be present, right? I think the best thing that we can do is to offer our full presence in these types of discourse. And I would invite you to practice deep listening without judgment. It's easy for us to, we have this, our mind has this tendency when we hear something, we want to react, right? And we want to put on judgment, whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, right? So we're just going to ask us to, remind ourselves to simply to listen and to be present, to be respectful of our own as well as our colleagues' learning process, right? This is a journey and our learning flows very freely, right, in this river of knowledge. If you can kind of visualize that image, right? We want to be supportive of one another, and we also want to offer grace, right, to ourselves as well as to others. And I would encourage all of us to be open to learn and to grow with one another. And this piece is really important, is that as we engage in this conversation, keep in mind that the focus should be on the practice and not on the individual or the person, right? And so I want to, I'm going to go ahead and invite our next speaker here. Nancy is a wonderful, wonderful educator from Windmill Spring School in San Jose, and she has graciously offered to open up the window into her classroom practice. So over the next 20 minutes or so, she's going to share some of her own practice that she uses in the classroom, and then we'll lead into the next activity. Take it away, Nancy.
Great, thank you, Natalie. I'm going to actually share my screen, so give me a second. Then I don't have to bother long to move the slide for me. All right, so hello, everyone. I was trying really hard not to share because I knew I was going to talk a lot during this part of the presentation. I was trying to hold back. Okay, so just to start, I'm going to start with some background information. So I'm going to contextualize my learning or my teaching practice. So like Natalie said, I teach kindergarten at Windmill Springs, which is a school in San Jose, in the east side of San Jose specifically. And I teach in a Vietnamese dual immersion program. It's actually the first one in Northern California. So our program is a 50-50 model, which means that we have two groups of classes. One class starts their day off in one language, and then during the middle of the day they switch, and then the second class, and then they go to like their second language. So I am the English teacher in our program, and then I have a partner teacher who teaches Vietnamese. To further elaborate on the makeup of our class, so I would say this year about 90% of the students in my class are Vietnamese. So I would say both ethnically Vietnamese and culturally Vietnamese. And I think it is important to kind of separate the two, because I feel like you could be ethnically one thing, but culturally be something else, right? For example, I'm Chinese American, but I would say, even though I'm Chinese, I definitely connect more to the American culture than I do to the Chinese culture. This year, I also have a student teacher. And for this particular experience that I'm going to share with you, what I'm going to share with you is her solo week. So my student teacher, she is Mexican American. And for her solo week, something that we were talking about in terms of her lesson planning was how to introduce and teach a digraph sound during our phonics instruction. So phonics is a big piece of kindergarten. So that was something that we definitely had to plan for. And it was an area that my student teacher kind of struggles a little bit as well. So what you're going to hear from me is kind of our conversation about that lesson planning, and then how she ended up implementing it, and kind of the thought process behind everything that she did as well. All right, so for this asset-based practice, I was thinking about how to label, or what I would call this practice. So this particular practice that we used was using the students' linguistic or their home language, and also their cultural funds of knowledge as a way to introduce and connect to learning phonic sounds in English. So the language of instruction in this scenario is English, because it's an English class. So when we were in kind of the lesson planning conversation, our question was like, you know, how will my student teacher introduce and teach the PH digraph sound? The students had already learned all the other digraphs. If you're not familiar with what a digraph is, it's two letters that make one sound. So like the SH, TH, CH. For PH, the sound is right. So in the conversation that we had, you know, one thing that I really like to do, and one thing that I encourage my student teacher to do, is find ways to connect phonic sounds to the things that students already know. So when we were thinking about the PH sound, it occurred to me that the digraph PH also appears in the Vietnamese language. And actually the digraph PH makes the same sound in Vietnamese as well. So I wanted her to really use that as a starting point to introduce and teach the students the sound. So we were thinking about, we already knew that, right? We already knew that that was a connection that the students could have. And we knew that that was kind of like a starting point that we could build on. So when we were thinking about how we could connect the Vietnamese PH sound with like the English PH sound, we wanted to think of words that they were familiar with. And then starting with like Vietnamese words that had the PH sound, and then moving that and moving towards like English word examples. So when thinking about PH words that we could connect the students to, we didn't want to just randomly pick like Vietnamese words that had PH. We wanted to be very like intentional and deliberate about it. And the way that our 50-50 model works is in my English class, I do need to stay in the language of instruction. So I do have to use English, all the time. But for this particular lesson, I did think that it was important that we bring in those Vietnamese words too. And we chose words that the students were very familiar with, and words that whether or not you were an English speaker or a Vietnamese speaker, you would see in the environment, or you would like hear in their community. So we first started with the students' names themselves, right? I think names are an asset that the kids bring. It's something that they use, it belongs to them, right? We see it all the time. So unfortunately this year, none of the students had names that had the PH sound. But what we did start thinking about was, what about their parents? What about like family members? So we went down the master list and we were looking for parent names. And a lot of names, a lot of the moms were actually named Feng. So we pulled that as a word, as a name that had the PH sound to connect to the students with. And then we started looking at last names. So a lot of students in our class, their last names were Pham or Fan, which also had the PH digraph. And then we started thinking about like maybe like other words. So in the east side of San Jose, there's a lot of pho restaurants. So pho is something that we see a lot in the community. We see like names, right? Like restaurant names with the word like pho in it. So we decided, okay, let's take pho as like another PH example. So these were the words that we brainstormed together that my student teacher could use as a starting point to introduce the digraph sound. Okay. So this is just kind of like an overview of how the lesson went. So when she introduced to the lesson, she said, okay, today we're going to learn this new digraph sound. This digraph has the letter P and H. She showed a Jack Hartman video. We like to do a lot of songs in kindergarten, so we did that. And then she started to bring in the Vietnamese part to connect with the students. So the next slide will show you kind of just like in general, this is how the conversation went. So my student teacher said, when we see the letter P and H together, it makes the F sound. Can everyone say it with me? Right? And then she said, friends, did you know that the digraph PH in English makes the same sound in Vietnamese? For example, the word pho. And then she asked the students, raise your hand if you know the Vietnamese word pho. Lots of students quickly unmuted. I love pho. I know what pho is. And my student teacher was like, great, I love to eat pho too. The word pho starts with PH. And then she continued, how many of you know someone named Feng? As expected, we knew lots of students would raise their hands. My mom is named Feng. I know that name. And my student teacher again said, yes, the name Feng also starts with PH. And then we moved into the last name Pham and Fan. And all the students that had fam or fan, or even the students, they can see their name on Zoom. They're like, so-and-so has the last name, it starts with PH. So immediately the kids were very excited to see that connection to Vietnamese words, to things that they were familiar with. And they were very excited to learn the digraph PH. And then over the course of the week, my student teacher would do like different sound sorting lessons with PH. She introduced English words that had PH so that the kids could see it. They could start, they could practice reading it. We would build words with PH. We would brainstorm words with the digraph sound. And every time, without fail, every time she got to the PH digraph, somebody in class would say, like the word pho, pho has PH. So I thought, from my perspective, I thought the lesson was great. The students learned the PH digraph, it really hit home and it connected to them. And just some examples about how we did the PH sound. So when we do digraphs, we also connect it with some sort of gesture. For PH, we did phone. And then just that these were examples of English words that my student teacher showed the kids with the PH sound. They would blend sounds together to read words, and then they would have to circle the picture that matches. So that's just an example of that. When they brainstormed words with digraph sounds, we could see again that connection to pho really stood out for the kids. So that was an example that they came up with for that brainstorm. And then for their seesaw work, again, we tried to as much as we could, right, we put in like those connections that the kids made to the Vietnamese language and the Vietnamese words into their work as well. One thing that was actually really interesting is here for the word pho, you see that my student teacher actually does the little tone marks. And that's because when she first said the word pho, she said pho, pho. And one of my students said, "You're not saying it right, Miss Sandra. It's pho, pho." So she really, for her, for that particular student, making sure that my student teacher said the tone right was really important to her. So my student teacher throughout the course of the week was very cognizant of making sure that she also said the tone correctly and writing it as well. Yeah. So that was practice. Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. Really appreciate your sharing there. And we're going to continue on with this activity. In the next segment, maybe we can allocate perhaps 10 minutes or so. If I'm going to invite you into small groups again, maybe 5 or 6 people per group. And I want you to think about the practice that Nancy has just shared with us. Right. And I would like for you as a group to identify and discuss what are some of the key elements that were embedded in this particular practice. And here's the third one is where would you place the practice that Nancy has just shared on the cultural continuum? And if you could maybe reference or provide some examples that Nancy has shared, to the best of your ability in terms of, recalling some of the details. And then perhaps what are some other ways in which you can enhance this practice, or you would modify, or you would adapt, or you would change, right, in your learning context. I'm going to go ahead.
I think I was supposed to be in the room if people are talking about me.
That's okay. You can stay here.
The phone, to help them remember PH is phone. But if I were to do it again, I would have actually done this. I would have taken a pho, like pretend like we were eating pho, and I would have had the kids go just like really like whatever on the thing. But yeah, so I maybe that's where we are.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. Really appreciate it. And I love the piece that you added about the adding the gesture and even with the gestures, right? Wanting to be intentional and wanting to make it very culturally and linguistically relevant as well. Fernando, do you want to take us into the next steps?
Yeah, so thank you, Nancy, once again. Amazing practice that you shared with us. And I was sharing, and we were, as Maria said, Dr. Ordaz said, it's in order to, I think sometimes we rise to be inclusive, but first we need to acknowledge, then you have to learn, and then finally you can become. So it takes some time. We need this process. It takes time. It's a journey. It's not just, I'm going to be inclusive. It's like, let's slow down, take some time. So what we would like, and thank you all for being with us for the workshop. Today is some homework that we'll like for you to complete in between now and the next workshop, which I believe is April 22nd. So we have almost a month apart between the second and the third. I know the first and the second, they were almost kind of like back to back, boom, boom. And now we have a little more time. And we would like for you, thinking about that, we're going to start talking about principle number 2. And remember, the principle number 2 talks about the high quality intellectual practices. Identify an instructional practice that you use in your class. It can be big, small. Perfect example, what Nancy shared with us. And based what you have learned so far, how would you modify this practice and what additional scaffolding will you include so that all students have access to the curriculum? So you know that we learned this is one of the basic principles when we learned how to become teachers and more experienced teachers is one lesson works. And just the example that Nancy provided right now, that now maybe next time, instead to go like this, we'll go like this, I think to increase that level. So think about one practice that you have in your class that you have done or you're currently doing. And then think about how can you enhance this practice so the practice can be maybe even more inclusive and all the students have access to the curriculum and they can develop language proficiency. Because one thing that I really like about the practice that Nancy presented, and that's the key for me about asset-based education, is the asset the students have at the beginning, the sun, was part of the learning process and it remained and enhanced at the end of the lesson. It did not disappear through the lesson, no? So the students get excited is now they can see, they can connect the transfer between languages. So that's the key of the asset base. We use assets, we continually use it throughout the lesson and they become the part of the outcome. And if you don't mind this sharing with us, I don't know, Natalie, do we have a link for this to share this homework?
We don't have a link, but we could send out a link if that is something that is useful.
Or getting
But
ready
we
for the
want
next,
this to be like an exercise. Yeah, we can share that in a link we can send out in an email. Mm-hmm.
But I think it would be good practice also that when we come back for the April 22, all of you bring this homework ready. So because we will work from what you're doing, because the important thing about the asset base is just what you're doing and how we can enhance, as Natalie said, and we emphasize today, how we can grow through these practices. No, practices can be better, can be redefined, can be polished. So think about the practice, come ready to the next workshop to share your practice and how we can learn from each other, because at the end is a process that we do all together. That sounds just like a plan, Natalie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Okay.
perfect.
So I think we wanna honor your time. It's already 5:31. Let me go to
Really quickly, sir, so there won't be a link that you send out.
We'll send you a link.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I was
We'll send you the link along with
Okay.
Nancy, if it's okay for us to share the today's presentation as well, so that you have access to it.
Thank you all.
And I think the last slide was the resource, Fernando. Yeah, in the date, so April 22nd.
Yeah, sorry. So we want to see you once again on April 22nd. We are so excited. We were reflecting with Natalie and with Nancy when we were preparing with this, how much we learned together. And again, once again, this is a process. It's not just one time I get and then go. Is learning together. So we would like to see you on the 22nd. And as we did in the last workshop, You know, we are big fans of children's books. Let's have more. That really, I really like these three. The one in the left side, Drawn Together, An Amazing Story, Outside Inside, and We Are Water Protectors. So we will keep sharing these books because we think the best tool to learn is through the stories, the storytelling, and all the fans of knowledge, fans of language the students bring to the classroom. Other than that, Natalie, is there anything else that you would like to share?
No, thank you all for being here today and for your, engagement and enthusiasm. And thank you, Nancy, for joining us along with colleagues from Franklin McKinley School District. Really appreciate the support here. And we will see you April 22nd.
And we stay here if you have any questions. We can have coffee time afterwards, no coffee time.
Sorry, I was just staying on to download that that link in the chat.
I just have to tell you, Nancy,